Welcome to the Social Media Church Podcast. I'm Neil Smith, and I'm joined by a special guest today, a very special guest today, Trent Dunham. Trent, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to get time with you and with your crew.
Yeah, so Trent, for those of you guys that don't know, you probably recognized his last name. Trent is my boss at Dunham+Company. We have been friends for many years and now colleagues for over a year, doing some really exciting things, as I've been able to share a lot of those things here on the podcast.
Yep.
Trent, if you would share a little bit about who Dunham+Company is, your experience at Dunham+Company, and what it is that we do.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the elevator speech on that is fundamentally and at our core, Dunham+Company is an agency that helps ministries, nonprofits, churches, increase the effectiveness of their impact. So every church, every ministry, every nonprofit is having some kind of impact right now. They could be having more. The gap between what is and what could be, we call the impact gap, and our job is to close that gap. And so whether that looks like attracting more people to your church or engaging more people to your mission, getting them to give and get involved, that's really what we're about. All the infrastructure and the stuff that goes behind that to draw people in and engage them with your cause and get them fired up to not just be passionate supporters, but to also be continual givers. So that's what we're all about. And we're motivated and energized by seeing kingdom impact. And so our measure of success is how well are the organizations that we work with able to have a greater impact for the kingdom. So.
Yeah. It's such a fun topic. I would say that a lot of churches don't like to talk about money, but when you talk about kingdom impact, it becomes a different conversation. So I think about church leaders that I've interfaced with, where if you ask any church leader, if you had $1,000 more to spend, now if you're a youth pastor, if you're a college pastor, you're a media pastor, if you're a senior pastor, you immediately probably know where your mind goes when you say $1,000.
Yeah.
You know, like I'd buy a new camera, or I'd do more Google ads, or I would, buy more chairs for our worship center. Everybody has an idea of, if we had more resources, what we could do to better do the ministry God has called us to. And that goes for the ministries we serve and for churches that we serve, or just churches, period. You and I connected in California as we were doing a series of conferences together. I was speaking on social media. You were speaking on creating a generous church culture. I remember the first time speaking and hearing you speak, and you're like, your background is not, you were a youth pastor for a season. So you did your due diligence in ministry, that you did your time. And all of us that were youth pastors thought we're going to be youth pastors forever. And God somehow finds other plans for some of us. But it scared me so much to follow you, because you were like a preacher on the stage from like the moment I heard you speaking. I'm like, man, how am I going to follow this guy? But you taught such practical, and then that's where you and I hit it off that first time we met. Such practical insights for churches. I when I was at Community Bible Church at the time, immediately started applying a lot of the things, because in my mind I just thought you just put a passive plate. You just put online giving. You put a kiosk in the lobby. You just do online giving, and you really dug into the practical nuances of the giving experience and what that looks like biblically, and just practically. As you think about the church, and as you've had the opportunity to now speak to hundreds or thousands of churches around the giving experience, especially the online giving experience, that's what's developing so much right now. What are maybe 2 or 3 principles, best practices, or missed opportunities that you see churches having?
Sure. Well, first, I think any really good creating a generous culture, and that's what I spoke on at that series of conferences that we were together on. And the first part of that is as a pastor, you have to communicate clearly the theology around giving. And so many pastors are just afraid to talk about giving in general. So, and then so many pastors are afraid of, giving online, is it going to cause people to go into debt and all that kind of stuff? And so my big encouragement on that, just first and foremost, to get it out of the way, is to say, preach solid biblical principles around that, address things like debt, if you feel like it's an issue for your church might struggle with, just be upfront about those things, because we're adults. If they're not going to hear good biblical principles from you, they're going to, on giving, they're going to hear it from somewhere, and that's going to be the culture or stuff that's not going to really lead them in the right direction anyway. So that's the first and foremost, kind of, that has to be part of how you help people give their full heart to God. Is teaching well on this subject. But
so you got to talk about it. I mean, that's the first point.
You got to talk about it, and you got to in biblical principles. It's not it's not about raising money for you or your church. That's not the point. The purpose is twofold. One, God wants his people to fund his kingdom work because he wants their heart ultimately. And then two, the mission will get done. God doesn't need our money, but he really would love for us to be involved financially because it shows where our heart really is. And that's really what we need to communicate to our congregants. So talk about it first of all. The second thing is, as it relates directly to your question on online giving, is make sure that you're on the right platform. I mean, so many churches that we talk to who have just said, well, we have online giving. Okay, what's that experience like? Have you evaluated that? I actually was with a church 2 weeks ago, might have been 3 weeks ago, and we performed what we have, which is called an online fundraising audit. And we just go into the church giving experience and we audit it for the church and tell them, hey, is this optimal, or what could you improve? And it took 7 clicks to submit a donation on their website. 7 clicks. I think at 7 clicks, we're probably at the point where we need to give them a financial reward at the end of that process for sticking in the process for so long. But it was brutal. I mean, if someone makes it through that, they are a committed donor, a committed giver. But obviously, we got to be better about some of the systematic things that we have in our online giving experience. So I think one is just evaluate the infrastructure, the process. Is it easy? Do we make it really difficult? So that's, I think, first and foremost. The second thing is, do we communicate with our congregation outside of the service itself? Do we give them easy on-ramps to give through our email communications or through the way that we create community in our social media? Oftentimes we kind of fall back on the fact that the only place we can cast vision or ask people to get involved is from the pulpit or on Sunday morning or Saturday night, whenever our services are. But the reality is that we have a lot of other communication channels too to utilize in order to continue to get people engaged. I was talking with a pastor just last week, and we were talking about how regular attender anymore these days is like 1.2 to 1.5% or weeks out of a month that they're actually attending church. So, what does that do? How am I going to be able to communicate with them on a regular basis if they're not in the sanctuary? Well, I think email communication is one of those important things that you've got to have a strategy around and be intentional about. So those are a couple things that's off the top of my head that are important as you're considering online giving and how you support it well.
Yeah. I think those might seem so simple, but as a church, we often don't do that. I think we just assume people are going to give because that's just what you do to the church. You just give 10%. People ask the plate, you put money in it, and it just works. Yeah. And we just assume that it doesn't matter how easy or hard our giving experience is. If somebody goes to our church, they're going to give, and they're going to go through 10 clicks if that's what it takes.
Right.
That, I want to dig into that a little bit. I feel like, I'm learning a ton being a Dunham+Company, and that process. People leave the experience midway through, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Abandonment rate is one of those things that's hard to measure. It's possible to measure if you have the right analytics on the back end. But people abandon at every click. You basically are eliminating a portion of people who would complete the giving process. Yeah. And there are other things too that are important in that giving process to help improve the completion rate of that experience. For instance, having a privacy policy, having some kind of symbols around the giving form that show that it's a secure experience, things like that, that will help kind of take away questions that people might have as they're going through that process. But yeah, the amount of we would be foolish to think that everyone who starts that process finishes it.
Yeah. I think probably my biggest takeaway from your session, the sessions that we did together, was the power of storytelling. And we talk about this in the church a lot, yet the pastor is often the storyteller on the platform, but there are plenty of storytelling opportunities beyond that. And from a communication standpoint, we're often so focused on what we're about to do and don't stop to highlight what God has just done. And so we don't stop to highlight like what happened at camp. We don't stop to highlight what the 10,000 that just got baptized, or the 2 people that just got baptized. God is doing a work in our churches, and that's, in many ways, that's what people are giving to and helping to tell those stories. Can you maybe dig into that a little bit and how important that is and how people do that practically?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I want to start with the second point that you made, which is reflecting on the successes. I mean, we're all running fast, and we've got a lot to do. We got a lot of ministries to support. We got, it's hard to keep up with it all sometimes.
Yeah.
But we so rarely stop down to celebrate the successes that people, I think, even subconsciously begin to wonder, like, is it working? Because as a senior adult, you have no clue what's happening with the youth ministry. I mean, unless you're volunteering there, which is probably not a whole lot of people, right?
Yep.
You have no idea what the success. I mean, did anyone accept Christ in the youth ministry this year? Did anyone get baptized? Did they have an impact in the areas they went on mission trips? I mean, it's really hard to know that if as a church we don't tell you that. Yeah. And so I think that's important because people are making decisions to give. One of the stats we share is that the average professing evangelical believer gives 2 to 2.5 of their total income to charity of any kind. And that's the kind of the most recent number that I've got. And think about that. That's not 10% of the tithe, right? That's 2.5% to any charity. So and the average donor in America, the average general donor in America gives to 7 charities. So think about that, 2.5%. And even if you're the top one on their list as their house of worship, you're getting a portion of 2.5%. So how's that working out? That's not working out well. Yeah. So, but part of it is we aren't doing a good job, not just of casting a vision for what the church wants to accomplish, but reporting back on that success and saying, hey, you gave, and as a result of your giving, these are the lives that are being changed. This is the impact that's happening on a weekly, monthly, whatever basis. And we just miss a huge opportunity. I think it's telling the story and being proactive about that, of life change, both in the sanctuary and then through email, social, as much as possible. But also it's saying thank you. The church, when you look at the general nonprofit sector, one of the biggest areas of focus is called donor care. And really, what's your thank you process? Yeah. How are you stewarding those relationships of donors to your organization? It's almost a completely unaddressed topic in the church sector, which baffles me as to why we never say thank you to people for giving. Yeah, it's an expectation that God has for people who are engaged in a mature level of a relationship with Jesus Christ. Yep. There's no question about that. But that doesn't preclude us or exclude us from saying thank you for people being involved in order to make these things happen. So what's your thank you process? What's your policy or your approach to thanking? Are you writing notes? Is the entire staff involved in some way to write notes, make phone calls, engage people when they can? And I think those are 2 areas that as a church, we don't do a great job at. And if we spent even just an ounce of our energy improving those 2 areas alone, just the connectivity that people would feel in our congregation to the mission would be much more tangible, much more real. And as a result, they'd just be willing to give more money just because that's where their heart is being drawn.
Yeah, it's amazing, what happens. And I think it's amazing the missed opportunities that we have in the church, just getting very practical. But I think at the core, and what I love about you is that it's all spiritual at the end of the day. And it's about leading your congregation effectively spiritually. And there's no doubt talking about money can be awkward, but talking about money is important, and it's core to where our heart is. I want to talk practically. This is the Social Media Church podcast, so we're going to talk about social media a little bit. You are not a big social media guy. You're on Twitter.
Yes.
Follow you, Trent_Dunham on Twitter. But you are not a big social media guy, but you believe in social media. And so I want to talk about this. We don't talk about Dunham as a company a lot, we really just talk about the ministries we serve, because that's our heart and that's what we're about. But Dunham as a company is a very significant company that serves over 100 ministries around the world. We have, our headquarters are in Dallas. We have an office in Sydney, Australia. And it has been, I joke that you're the guy that took me out of ministry, but at the end of the day, you took me out of ministry to do more ministry. I mean, the ministry I do today has exponential impact as I was a full-time pastor, and I'm so grateful for that. It's amazing as I just think about the last year and the work that I've been privileged to do in the ministries that we're serving. But I say that to say that the company was doing great before you hired me, but you made a huge investment to say social media is important to us, that when you're going to hire me, we now have a team of over 20 working on social media on behalf of our clients. It's a big investment we've made. Why did you make such an investment in social media, and what are you seeing developing around it? Why do you see social media as important for ministries?
Well, that's a great question. And I think as any healthy organization, we're committed to change. And we want not change for change's sake organizationally, but we have a passion to not number one, for us not to be left behind, but number two, for our clients, for the ministries we serve, to not be behind the curve in any way in how people are being reached and engaged. And, all the Facebook stats of how many people are on Facebook. I mean, what was the stat you threw out yesterday on how many people are engaged on a daily basis on Facebook?
1.2 billion daily active users, spending on average over 20 minutes a day on the platform.
Well, I mean, I don't think I need to say anything else other than what you just said as the reason why. I mean, number one, it's the place where people are. They're living life there. I mean, my wife is on Facebook quite a bit, right? They do life on Facebook. She's not just like reading random articles, right? She's doing life with her friend group. They're connecting in meaningful ways through Facebook and having conversations. I mean, they're doing life, and there's so many opportunities for us to invade and utilize that platform for the gospel. I mean, quite frankly, and I've seen it happen in such powerful ways to bring people, number one, to a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Number two, to go deeper in their faith. Why would we not want to be at the forefront of something where God can use what we've invested? Think about your church. Okay, if I can just take a minute to talk to the people here. Think about the time and resource you have invested in the Sunday experience, the Sunday sermon, the content in your children's ministry, the content in your youth ministry, in your single adults ministry. Think about all that time and resource you've invested, the blood, sweat, and tears that you've poured into that. Is it only effective in the four walls of your church? And everyone on this podcast knows that's not the case. There are people out there who have no healthy home church in their area. There are people who are prohibited from worshiping with other believers in certain countries that now have access to solid biblical teaching, number one, but just the awareness that Jesus exists and desires a personal relationship with me. And we can use social media to accomplish that. Why wouldn't I want to be a part of that? And so it fits in different ways in every church's strategy. It's not cookie cutter. And I think that's part of the passion we have, is that there are certain truisms that of how people interact with one another and interact with content. But every church has a unique DNA. Every ministry has a different way they express God's love and implement that in their local community, nationally and around the world. And social media is such a great way for that DNA to come across, to be unique, to kind of use the gifts that God has blessed your church and your leadership with to communicate to certain people who probably will likely not hear it from another source. It won't resonate the way that it will coming from you. And there are just people who are all wired differently and hear and want to consume information in different ways. So, I mean, that's really the passion that drives us, is if this can augment and enhance the ministry efforts that are already being really slaved over and really, spent a lot of time on, and resource, like I mentioned earlier, then if there's anything we can do to amplify that energy and effort, then by all means, I think we want to be at the forefront of that.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And I'm honored that you chose me, to lead so many of those efforts. And it's been a privilege. And the things that we have seen, I would say the fruits of that investment have been overwhelming and exciting. And then I would say even more exciting is where I think we're going in the next year to 2, 3. I mean, it's hard to think beyond 2 years in this world of social media, but where I think we're going over the next year or so, and the conversations I'm having on this podcast around messenger bots and 360 video and virtual reality that seem crazy are not so crazy. It's an exciting day, and it's a new day with new challenges, but even bigger new opportunities. So one of the things that you and I have been working on for over a year now is Dunham Fundraising Institute. And so one of the things we as a company serve ministries large and small. We have ministries we serve that don't even have a full-time staff person yet and are very small, and we have very large ministries that we serve. And I don't think people fully understand. I don't think they need to understand all the magnitude of that. But at the end of the day, we want to serve every ministry in some way to help them do more ministry. Yep. And so one of the things that, the barriers sometimes working with us is cost for smaller organizations or people that are just getting to know us. And so we created the Dunham Fundraising Institute, taking some of the courses you and I had developed, that Rick Dunham has developed, that other team members have developed. And we want to basically take our thought leadership and share that with nonprofits and with churches specifically. You and I specifically have a deep heart for the local church. And our whole team has a heart for the local church, but you and I specifically have a heart for the local church. And so we have created out of Dunham Fundraising Institute, ChurchPlus, which is a membership program for church leaders to do just what we've been talking about here. We want to help you, basically create a generous culture in your church. Do you want to talk a little bit about ChurchPlus and, your heart behind that and the things that we talk about in that program?
Sure. I think there's a couple aspects. First of all is just the conversation. I mean, having a forum for the conversation to happen of how can we do some of these things functionally better so that, and a lot of it's not necessarily rocket science, and it isn't hard, but being intentional and consistent. And how do we go about that? What are best practices? Look, God called you as a pastor or church leader to be a pastor or church leader, to teach and to lead well. And so some of these things they don't come naturally. They're not, you don't have a course in seminary on, the first fundraising that you need to do with your church. That's just typically not a course. So just how do we practically implement some of this stuff? And just having a forum to be able to focus on specific aspects of that from a month-to-month basis, and then have the ability to create a community within that where pastors and church leaders can share experiences, can bounce things off one another, where Nils, they can communicate with you and with me to talk about questions they have or situations that have come up and just stuff like that. So I think number one is just the conversation, because it doesn't happen in very many forums. And so much of what is dealt with around fundraising in the church space is so capital campaign focused, which is great. And I'm definitely not anti-capital campaign, hear me on that. But there is such an opportunity to create and this is why creating a generous culture is the flagship course in ChurchPlus for a reason, because it's beyond just doing some campaigns, but it's creating a culture where people end up just giving hilariously because out of the desire and the abundance of their heart and relationship with Jesus, as opposed to being arm twisted and the worst part of the service being, and the most boring part of the service being the offertory time. So I think, that's the heart behind it, is that churches would just have, if there's one thing that you could walk away from each month with, that you could implement that would just make it that much easier for you or that much better for your church environment or your experience or your congregation, that's a win for us, because then we know that it's incrementally making progress, and hopefully someday it's just really running on all cylinders to where it's just minor tweaks here and there, and the church and your church just is operating at a whole new level of ministry.
Yeah, I love it. when I heard your first talk, and then that's where so many of these conversations came out of. It was just one of the things that I feel like every church needs to know, and everything that you have to share goes way beyond just what you can do in a 1 hour presentation, which is why we created this membership platform. You're creating new content every month. I get to be the community manager. So I get to be the guy building relationships with these church leaders to help them grow and learn together. So it keeps me, deeply connected to church leaders and investing, together. And then we're pulling in other team members to help speak into these churches. And so I'm just so pumped about what we're doing. I mean, getting very practical. We do a monthly webinar where you do a live teaching, we do live Q&A. All of the old webinars are available on demand. So once you sign up for ChurchPlus, you have access to all the old content. So there's always new content, because this conversation, things are constantly improving or changing, where there's just development opportunities that you're speaking into. When you sign up, you also get access to a social media course that I created, the Generous Church Culture course that you created. There's just so much content there.
Yep.
My quick sales pitch is really, it's very simple. It's $99 a month, and you have access to all of this content, and you have access to the community, which is a private Facebook group that I'm involved in, and other church leaders are involved in, to learn together. We are also offering for our listeners here on the podcast a special $1, first month or trial month offer. So when you sign up, you just have to pay $1. You get full access to everything. You can cancel anytime. So if you just use the coupon code MORE, MORE, that will give you that access to that $1 trial fee. I'm gonna make a promise, Trent. You and I haven't talked about this, but if somebody does ChurchPlus for 3 months, and they apply the things that they learn in ChurchPlus for 3 months, and they don't see immediate results, I will personally, this is not a Dunham+Company, I will do this personally. I will reimburse that, so what is it, $99, basically $201. So I will personally reimburse you, because I know, because I experienced as a church leader, that when you apply these principles, you are going to see generosity increase in your church. And what happens over the first 90 days is just a fraction of what happens over time. And at the end of the day, it's a fraction of what will happen in the hearts of your people as you really embrace these principles. So I just want every church leader to do this. And that's why we tried to make it as affordable as we could, as just practical and simple as we could. And so it's just so good for church leaders, this content and this program, that it's been needed for years. And I needed it as a church leader, and we're providing it. And so I just want everybody to get in. I want to take away the risk. You've got first month for $1. You've got first 90 days where you have no risk, because I will cover that cost. If it doesn't, you don't see results. So anyways, that's my sales pitch. Trent, any other thoughts on your end about ChurchPlus?
No, I think that our mindset is the same, which is like, look, if we could help every church in America improve 10%, what does that do for the body as a whole? I mean, think about it. Even if it was 5%, I mean, just think about the additional ministry that could happen. Yeah. And so that's why I think we're passionate, just that this is too big an issue in our culture today, in America, especially in the Western world, where consumerism has dominated and kind of overtaken, and we see the church through a consumer lens, and that's a problem. And we see that as what's happening in the giving from our bodies. So we're just passionate about trying to wake the church up, and then resource the church to be able to do what God's called it to do. Perfect.
Well, Trent, thanks for the time. Thanks for speaking into the church leaders on this podcast.
Yeah. All right, buddy. Thanks.